Hey folks, so welcome to our lecture on introducing and explicating information. As you begin work on your argumentative essay, right, you're going to need to bring in information and sources to support whether you're for it or whether you're against Proposition 12. You're going to need some support to back up what you're saying, right? And so we're going to talk about how you can introduce that information in your body paragraphs, as well as how you can explicate or comment on the relevance of that information you're bringing in. And that is so crucial that you don't just drop in information without letting your reader know where that information is coming from and why that information is important. It's so crucial. Now, the information I'm going to be sharing with you does borrow from Chapter 3 of They Say, I Say, which you've been assigned. I encourage you, if you haven't read that chapter, to please make sure to do that reading. Okay, so let's go ahead and begin our slideshow. So the first thing I want to talk about is using quotations, right? So let's say you have a source of information and you want to quote them directly, meaning you want to take what the source said word for word, right? That would be a quotation. Essentially, when you quote, you're repeating exactly what the source said, and you're using quotation marks and MLA citations in order to indicate where you got that information from. Okay, so why do we use quotations? Well, we use them to support our position. So I'd like to give you an example of a quotation. So here, where it says example, and this is connected to Proposition 12. So one of the pitfalls of Proposition 12, however, is that it may spike egg prices. According to the United States Department of Agriculture, USDA, egg prices are already expected to rise in California. Quote, egg prices are expected to increase 9 to 10% in 2018 and an additional 2 to 3% in 2019. Okay. So notice what the student did here. They introduced the information, the fact that Proposition 12 may spike egg prices. They said where they got that information from, according to the United States Department of Agriculture, right? And then they used quotation marks to clearly distinguish between where their points were and where the quotation began. So this is a really good example of how to introduce a quotation and how to then bring it actually in. Okay, so I want to talk about this point a little bit further, how we can introduce quotations. Now, we probably all know according to, right, or as so-and-so states, but there's a lot of different ways to actually introduce quotations, and we want to make sure we're using a variety of ways, right, so that we don't become kind of bland and just keep saying according to, according to, according to. So I'll give you a few examples here. And I also want to note that when you're introducing a quotation, you might very well, in this essay, want to introduce where specifically and who specifically that source is coming from, meaning that if this is a researcher at Stanford, you'd want to say that as you introduce the person, right? That gives credibility and shows that your quotation is reliable. If it's coming from the USDA, you'd want to say that, right? You'd want to say as a USDA report suggests. You want to include where and who that information is from. Okay, so I want us to look at 5 different ways to introduce quotations and feel welcome to use these ways of introducing. It's not plagiarism. These are commonly used, like according to. It's not plagiarism to use that phrase. These are commonly used phrases in writing that you can use. Okay, so a recent USDA report points out, in a report, the USDA notes the following, as a recent USDA report explains, according to a recent USDA report, within a summary report by the USDA, the authors state, so notice they're all kind of doing the same thing. They're all introducing that USDA quotation. However, they use different phrasing and different words in order to introduce it. So I encourage you to check these out and to feel welcome to use it as you're introducing information into your own essay. Okay, so the next thing that I want to talk about, which is like the most important part of today's lecture, which is explicating quotations. I think most students know how to introduce a quotation, But explicating quotations, meaning talking about why your quotation or your information matters, is something that sadly is often a weak part of student writing, right? The idea is after a quotation, you don't just drop it in, but you explain why it's important or relevant to your overall essay. So after quotation, you need some sort of transition that explains, hey, this is why this quotation matters in the context of my argument, right? So for this, I have a variety of, phrases and templates that you could use if you're struggling with explicating quotations. Meaning, if after a quotation you're like, I don't know what to say, I'm struggling with how to, how to move from quotation to commentary. Feel welcome to use some of these phrases. So I'll let you guys look at these phrases, but I do want to point out a few that I often use. This third one here, blank points out that blank, which is important because blank. Notice if you use that, you're going to remind readers of the author, you're going to remind them of the point that author is making, and you're going to explain why it's important. Another one that you might use is notice that the article explicitly states that, or notice, right? And that helps you kind of signal to readers that this is something to notice in that quotation. So I encourage you to check these phrases out and use them as you begin work on your Proposition 12 paper, argumentative paper. Okay, so this is the last thing that I want to go over is paraphrasing. And this was kind of a weakness that I saw in some students' essays for your Leslie Bisgold evaluation. So there is a difference between paraphrasing and quoting. Now there's also some similarities, but I want to talk about the difference first. When you quote, you use the words of the source directly, word for word. When you paraphrase, you keep the meaning of the source, but you use your own words. Now, paraphrasing isn't just changing one or two of the author's words, it is changing the entire phrasing, using your own phrasing to kind of quickly get through what the source said, right? Now, in paraphrasing, you don't quote, you don't use quotation marks, but you still need to say where that information is coming from, even if you're paraphrasing it. So you can't just make it seem like it's your own. You still need to have a introductory phrase, like according to so-and-so, or as so-and-so mentions, right? So you still need to signal that this is not your own idea. And similarly, you also need to talk about why it's important, right? So after a paraphrase, you'd want to say, hey, this is why this information is relevant in regard to my own essay. Okay.